With that, I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I have a little cheat sheet here to read to you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome board members and guests to the Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We welcome the public to in-person participation, and those not attending in person can access the meeting through the Zoom link. And I should slow down in my reading. Through the Zoom link webinar provided on the agenda. A recording of this meeting will be available on the PCTPA website. This meeting is being conducted via teleconference under Executive Order N2920. We appreciate your participation and patience with this technology. Public comment. There will be multiple opportunities throughout the meeting for public comment. After I open an item up for public comment, those joining by webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raised hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. And if you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who've indicated they wish to speak. For those joining us in person, you're welcome to come to the podium. We ask that anyone making a public comment state their name and city of residence. You'll then have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and we'll notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Solvi Sable, our clerk, at ssabol@pctpa.net. Board action. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or seconding a motion for the record. And once an item has been moved and seconded, I'll request the clerk call the roll. Thank you. And Mr. Holmes, would you be so good as to lead us in the salute to the flag? Didn't mean to wake you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. With that, we'll move on to roll call.
Amara,
Present via Zoom.
Baker,
Here.
Broadway,
Here.
Burris, Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Miss you all here.
Joyner,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
Wilkins.
Present.
Alrighty.
All right. We move on to item C, approval of the amended action minutes for June 23rd, 2021. Anyone have any changes they request? Seeing none, do I have a motion on the item?
Motion to approve?
Second. I have a motion and a second.
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Alrighty, motion passes.
Item D, agenda review. Any requests for changes to the agenda from either the board or staff?
Staff has no recommended changes to the agenda or order.
All right, and I see none from cyberspace either, so we'll go ahead and move forward. Item E is public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda? Lee?
Lee Bastian, Sheridan Municipal Advisory Council. The reason I'm here is because we have a dangerous intersection at Highway 65 and Railsa Road. 3 weeks ago, we had a 3-car crash. 3 people went to the hospital in ambulances, and the 4th one had to be air flighted out. And so I'm hoping to get, and then we've had the week before that, we had a 2-car wreck. A couple of months ago, we had a fatality there. And a couple of months ago, we had 2 semis collide there. So we're hoping, the community would hope that the 2 projects that have been approved for our area would be moved up. The one would be the interchange at 65 Reals Road. It's on the approved agenda, but it's way down on the list. And it's my understanding that Caltrans has bought enough land so they could do the interchange. The other project approved is Lincoln Bypass Project 2B, which widens the highway from 2 to 4 lanes from West Boyce to the county line. Of course, that it just moves the traffic jam up further. During the normal commute, the traffic light at Wheatland Main Street backs the traffic up all the way to Rielsa Road sometimes. And right now, they're having the pumpkin farm is open. And they're expecting over 200,000 visitors in the 2 months that they're open, which is going to create a massive backup on that next section. And then I want to thank whoever put up the traffic awareness zone sign on the 65 north of Rios Road. Maybe it'll slow down the rear enders we get up there. So I thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Lee. Any other members of the public wishing to comment at this time? No one in the house, and I don't see anyone on Zoom, so we'll go ahead and move forward. Mike, are there any, Caltrans is very aware of the problem there on 65 rail, so go ahead.
Yeah, we certainly I'll mention it to the deputy or either both the deputy director and the director of Caltrans District 3. I talk to them regularly and we'll bring this up. The only other thing I would mention that is a bit at play is Yuba County and the city of Wheatland are also working on the Wheatland bypass project, which also has some bearing on this as well. So I'll make contact with both groups and see if there's anything that affects that, and if there's any interim safety measures that could be taken.
I would think that we could back off a mile or so, flashing signals of some sort, letting you know you're up full speed at that point, not expecting an interchange, and you're on it before you know it. So maybe some type of warning.
Yeah, we'll contact Caltrans and see if there's something we can do as an interim step. So,
all right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to item F, our consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Anyone wishing to pull an item from this consent agenda? And
Move approval.
I have a motion. Second from Mr. Holmes. So
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
yes,
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
yes,
Jones,
yes,
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
all right. Moving on to item G, consent calendar, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. We have one item. Anyone wishing to discuss that item, or can we move to a vote?
Howdeshelt moves.
I have a motion. Any second?
I'll second Sandy Amaro.
Okay. Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
yes,
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes,
Jones,
yes,
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. Item H, consent calendar for the Airport Land Use Commission. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. So if someone wishes to discuss this item, I'll accept the motion.
Burris moves approval,
I'll second the motion.
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
yes,
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes,
Jones,
yes,
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. We move on to item I, public hearing, adoption of negative declarations, notice of exemptions, and airport land use compatibility plans for the Auburn Municipal and Lincoln Regional Airports.
Good morning, members of the commission. David Melko, introducing this item. So if Jeremy can forward the slides a little bit here. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So we have an agenda for today's presentation. We're asking the board today to, as part of my staff introduction here, to ask the board to conduct a public hearing on the airport land use compatibility plan and the associated environmental documents, adopt the resolution for the negative declarations and initial studies and for the notice of exemption for the airports, and as well as adopt the resolution for the airport land use compatibility plans for Auburn Airport and Lincoln Regional Airport. The staff report is pretty well covered by the consultant presentation that will be followed, but there are 3 items within the staff report I want to briefly highlight for the commission's information. First is we, in the staff report, address existing noise issues. And as you recall, at the public workshop in June and then during our public comment period, the majority of the comments that we received dealt with noise. And as we explained to the public that we have no control over operations of an airport. And as a consequence, we have no control over existing noise conditions that may emanate from aircraft flying in and out of an airport. The text within the staff report basically notes that the FAA is the appropriate party, for people to address noise, safety, overflight complaints. We have the website, the FAA website link on our website, and so I would encourage people, to submit comments there, and they'll deal directly with the airport operators with respect to any concerns. Secondly, under the noise issue, there are a number of airports within California that have taken proactive approaches with respect to trying to deal with noise issues, recognizing the limitations that they have as an airport operator or as a municipality owning an airport. And so I've highlighted within the staff report 2 airports that Auburn Airport and Lincoln Airport management may want to visit and just explore further in terms of how town of Truckee Airport, as well as the city of Livermore Airport, deal with airport noise issues. Thirdly, within the staff report, we briefly touch upon general plan consistency. It's our hope, we've been working with the city staffs of Lincoln and Auburn, as well as Placer County staff throughout the entire Aiucp process to bring to you, hopefully in October, recommendations with respect to consistency determinations on their general plans. And so that item there will be back in October. The 4th item deals with liability issues. If you recall, we had a fairly spirited discussion with respect to liability at the June workshop. And in terms of context, that revolved around the infill policies that were proposed and the hypothetical if an infill project came before the Aiucp and the Aiucp denied that project, but that project was located in the unincorporated area and the county overruled the commission. Where does the liability lie? So we indicated we report back, and so you have within the staff report attachment 6, which is a memorandum from Deanne Gillick, our attorney, to the commission addressing that issue. And Deanne is available today if there are further questions on that liability memo. And with that, I would like to introduce Miranda Thompson with Mead & Hunt, our consultant that has worked very hard working with our project development team and myself on preparing this airport land use compatibility plan. And with that, I turn the presentation over to her.
Thank you, David. Good morning, commissioners. Miranda Thompson, project manager for Mead & Hunt, and wanted to also let you know that today we also have my colleague, Ken Brody, who's joining us virtually. We are very happy to be back in front of you today to present the final draft compatibility plan for Placer County. In June, we presented the draft compatibility plan to the commission and initiated the 30-day public review period. And the focus of my presentation today is to review the comments received and walk through the proposed revisions to the compatibility plan. Now, for the benefit of the audience, I'll give a brief overview of the role of Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, describe the responsibilities of local agencies after the compatibility plan is adopted by the commission, as well as summarize the key policy changes included in this draft compatibility plan, and walk through some of the environmental findings associated with the compatibility plan. Placer County Transportation Planning Agency is designated as the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission. In 2000, the commission adopted the first airport land use compatibility plan and then amended it in 2014, which Mead and Hunt was involved with that planning effort. The proposed ALUCP or compatibility plan in front of you today would replace the 2004 or 2014 edition once adopted. And it's an important reminder to inform the public here today that neither the Airport Land Use Commission or the compatibility plan have any authority over existing land uses, airport operations, or federal, state, and tribal lands. Once the commission adopts or amends a compatibility plan, local jurisdictions are required by state law to take one of two actions. One is to make its general plans and other land use documents consistent with a new compatibility plan. And that, as David mentioned, is the preferred path forward. The other option available to local jurisdictions is to overrule the commission in accordance and follow the steps in accordance with state law. Once a local jurisdiction attains that general plan consistency, they are responsible for conducting compatibility reviews of land use proposals within the airport influence area established by this commission. And they are responsible for implementing the compatibility criteria contained within the compatibility plan. Now, in accordance with state law, all new or amended general plans, zoning ordinances, new specific plans, or even airport planning efforts must come to the ALUC for a consistency determination. In developing the ALUCP update or compatibility plan update, a project development team was established, made up of representatives from the agencies listed here on this slide. The team was essential in providing background data to support the compatibility planning effort and served as a sounding board for recommended policy changes. State law requires compatibility plans to be based on an airport master plan or an airport layout plan approved by and adopted by the local airport's sponsor. This ALUCP update or compatibility plan update was triggered by the need to reflect two new airport layout plans for Auburn Municipal Airport and Lincoln Regional Airport. Although the compatibility zones and criteria for Blue Canyon Airport did not change, the revisions or refinements made to the county-wide policies would also apply to Blue Canyon Airport. The update includes revisions to the compatibility zones, wildlife and infill policies, as well as clarifying county-wide LUC policy. An important item to note here is that no changes were made to the compatibility criteria in terms of the density and intensity limits that would be established to the underlying land uses. This slide highlights the key changes to the compatibility zones to reflect the new Auburn Airport layout plan. The ALP includes a proposal to lengthen the airport's single runway, which in turn requires expanding several compatibility zones, which are listed here on this slide. A consequence of the expanded airport influence area is that the county of Placer or Placer County will need to amend its aircraft overflight zoning ordinance to reflect the new zone boundaries. The draft plan also includes special conditions for the listed plan developments to acknowledge or document the special compatibility conditions applied to those land uses. For Lincoln Airport, the principal change reflected in the city's airport layout plan is a larger runway protection zone at the south end of the main runway, which in turn requires expanding Compatibility Zone A. It's important to note here that all other compatibility zones remain as shown in the 2014 compatibility plan, which is the current plan. A new special condition is also included for the Placer County Conservation Plan. For both Auburn and Lincoln, a new wildlife hazard critical zone is proposed to help implement federal guidance related to wildlife hazards, particularly bird strikes. The team worked closely with the Placer County Conservation Program administrator to refine and establish the wildlife policies contained in this update. In accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, we evaluated the environmental effects of the draft compatibility plan. We found that although minor changes would be required to local general plans and zoning ordinances, no significant environmental impacts would result from the updated compatibility plans. To this end, no effect determinations were received by the Department of Fish and Wildlife for both Auburn and Lincoln. That was received in August, end of August. And we also prepared a notice of exemption for Blue Canyon. The environmental evaluations also looked at potential displacement of future housing. Around Auburn, no displacement would occur within the city limits, but limited displacement could occur within the unincorporated areas of Placer County in the proposed expanded zone B1. Around Lincoln, minor displacement would occur within zone A for the unincorporated area of Placer County and within the city's sphere of influence. It's important to note here that the potential displacement would not affect the local jurisdiction's ability to fulfill their regional housing needs allocation requirements. As such, we prepared, negative declarations, and those documents were circulated for a 30-day public review period. We collected comments at the ALUC hearing held in June and during the 2 virtual public workshops. Comments could also be submitted via the ALUC website that was established for this project and directed to ALUC staff. We received a total of 45 comments, some of which were duplicates, which means, for example, a commenter may have provided a verbal comment during the ALUC hearing and then followed it up with a written submittal. Comments were grouped into 3 categories. Those that had general applicability to all of the airports within covered by this compatibility plan, as well as those that were specific to Auburn Municipal Airport and specific to Lincoln Regional Airport. The types of comments we received included questions about how the wildlife policies or expanded compatibility zones would affect a particular property. Questions about airport operations and planning processes undertaken by the airport sponsors were also provided, and then comments regarding existing noise impacts. And although the last 2 types of comments are not within the purview of the Airport Land Use Commission, it is important to note that the purpose of the compatibility plan is to prevent future compatibility conflicts like those currently experienced by members of the community. The team prepared responses to each comment, and that's included in your packet. None of the comments required a change to the compatibility plan itself or triggered the need to update the environmental documents. Those that were related to airport operations and noise complaints were forwarded to the airport management, as David mentioned. The addendum included in your packet summarizes the technical revisions made to the compatibility plan and CEQA documents to correct typos. These minor revisions do not warrant recirculation of the documents. The draft plan plus the addendum constitutes the final document. So the Mead and Hunt team will prepare the final plan to reflect the adoption date and will incorporate the changes listed in the addendum. The final plan will be posted on the Aiucp website sometime in October. The final steps for this planning effort include certification of the negative declarations and adoption of the Placer County Airport land use compatibility plans. And the subsequent actions are listed here. As David mentioned, we'll be working very closely with the local jurisdictions to help them attain that general plan consistency determination from this commission. We will also bring forward one of the papers prepared as part of this planning effort related to the Aiucp fee structure. And staff has interest in providing training on the new airport land use compatibility plan to the local jurisdictions planning staff. With that, I will turn it over to David. Thank you.
Okay, in closing, in this presentation here, we're recommending that you conduct a public hearing on the environmental documents in the airport land use compatibility plan, that at the conclusion of the public hearing, that you adopt the CEQA negative declarations and notice of exemption. And then after that action, adopt the airport land use compatibility plans and addendums. I will note that upon the adoption, they will be effective, and so they will replace the 2014 plan. And then in addition, as part of the resolutions include authorization by you to the executive director to notify local agencies and the California Division of Aeronautics that we have adopted an updated plan. And as part of that notification, at least to the jurisdictions, that they will need to make their respective general plans consistent with the airport land use compatibility plan within 180 days, or those jurisdictions will need to take an overrule action. And with that, Miranda and I would be glad to take any questions from the commission. Otherwise, we would recommend that you open the public hearing.
All right, David, thank you. Any questions or comments from the commission? I see no raised hands out in cyberspace either. So we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify on this matter? If you're in-house, approach the podium. If not, raise your hand on social media or press *9 on your phones. Seeing none.
We do have one member of the public in cyberspace. Let's see here.
Mr. Prosser.
Good morning, Chair Joyner and members of the agency and Airport Land Use Commission. This is Steve Prosser, Community Development Director for the City of Lincoln. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank and commend your staff, from the directors through planning staff and consultants, for a professional and collaborative process and bringing this project to fruition, and look forward to continuing that collaboration for furtherance of local and regional transportation goals. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Yes.
Good morning, Chair Joyner, members of the commission. I'm Alex Fish with the Placer County Planning Services Division, and just wanted to take a moment to echo Mr. Prosser's comments, mainly to reaffirm comments made at your June 23rd meeting, where the mitigated negative declaration was authorized for circulation. And that is to state again that Placer County staff did work very closely with the PCTPA staff as well as Mead and Hunt to address land use compatibility issues around both the Lincoln and Auburn airports. And with respect to the Auburn airport in particular, we did work with your staff to incorporate a special infill policy that reflects housing opportunities in the North Auburn area that are located in proximity to existing services such as employment, employment, transit, shopping, medical, and school facilities. Also wanted to mention that concurrent with the compatibility plan update, as David stated, Placer County has processed and completed an update to its housing element and is nearing completion of an update to the safety element. And this work has positioned the county to attain consistency between the county general plan and the updated compatibility plan. And we will be initiating final efforts towards that end in the next few weeks. And lastly, just want to again thank David and Executive Director Lucan for their collaborative approach on this update, as well as to acknowledge the exceptional expert guidance provided by Miranda Thompson and Ken Brody. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Chair Joyner, we do have one other member of the public. Steve, you are allowed to talk.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. This is Steve Pettit. I'm a resident of North Auburn. I have a couple of questions about the new airport plan. First of all, in some of the documents, I was able to find a size description of the aircraft that were allowed on Auburn Airport. And I did not find such size limits in the new plan. And my second question is on in the document titled Chapter 7 background data. It does list the on the chart on page, I guess, Chapter 7, page Exhibit 7B. I'm sorry, Exhibit 7C, I guess this is. It describes the current aircraft that are based in the airport, and I see no business jets in the current plan. The new plan has 8 business jets. So from just my point of view, it looks as though the extension of the runway is to accommodate these 8 business jets. Our property is located in the airspace for both takeoffs and landings at the Auburn Airport. And also we're in the airspace for landings at Sacramento Airport. So we do have a significant amount of air traffic over our property. My concern is the addition of 8 business jets coming into Auburn Airport at low altitudes would definitely be an impact to our property. And I'm questioning why Auburn Airport is being used for being expanded for business jets. I'll take my answer offline. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to testify? No. So Mike, as a matter of procedure here, typically in the city of Lincoln, during a public hearing, this is straight up testimony for the record. It's not a question and answer period. Does that hold true here as well?
That's fine. Or if you would like us to answer a question that the public
If we can,
raises,
it would be.
we can attempt to do that. And David and Miranda could attempt to answer that.
All right. Do I need to close the public hearing before we do that?
You can, yes.
And at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. And David and Miranda, you could attempt to address Steve's questions. That would be great.
Yes, it was a great question. I want to reiterate that Chapter 7 that he pointed out does summarize the basis of this compatibility plan update, meaning all of the background information provided by the city of Auburn as the airport sponsor for this planning effort. So in terms of the justification for the runway length extension that's included in the Aiucp proposal, that is not something that this team or this Airport Land Use Commission has any authority to change. So we are simply documenting the information provided to us by the airport sponsor in accordance with state law. We must base the compatibility plan on an approved airport layout plan or master plan. So we've done that. There is reference to business jet activity particularly under the future conditions. And that is one of the reasons why we are preparing an update to the compatibility plan, is to reflect changes in how the airport sponsor intends to utilize their facility in the future over a 20-year period. So most of the questions raised by this member should be directed to the city of Auburn as the airport sponsor, because it has to deal with some of the assumptions underlying their proposal for the runway extension.
Very good, thank you. And I'm sure Steve has that information, that contact information. It sounds like he's very knowledgeable about what goes on.
And the contact information is also available on our website as well.
All right, very good. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to adoption of resolution 2130 for negative declarations, initial studies for Auburn Municipal and Lincoln Regional Airports, and notice of exemption for Blue Canyon Airport. Anyone wishing to make a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, so we'll have to take those separately. I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2130 for the negative declaration, initial studies for Auburn Municipal and Lincoln Region Airports, and notice of exemption for Blue Canyon Airport.
Second. I have a motion Broadway, second Holmes. So we. roll call.
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Haudashelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I'll move adoption of resolution 21-31 for the airport land use compatibility plans for Auburn Municipal and Lincoln Regional Airports.
I have a motion and a second, Mr. Holmes.
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Haudashelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you all. We move on to item J, I-80 Auxiliary Lanes Project, approving PG&E utility agreement. Mr. Melko. Miranda, thank you.
Okay, switching from planes to roads with utilities. Okay, so as a reminder, on the Aux Lanes project, PCTPA is the implementing agency for the environmental design and right-of-way phases. Caltrans will ultimately advertise, award, and administer the construction of the project. That process is called AAA. Federal environmental documents for this particular project were completed back in October of 2016, and then there was a revalidation done for the CEQA document in 2020. And of course, you all recall the project was awarded a large sum of construction funding from the California Transportation Commission back in December 2020. So why are we here today? Well, PG&E owns two gas lines that will conflict with the westbound fifth lane construction. These two gas lines cross Interstate 80. The cost to remove and relocate these two gas lines is estimated by PG&E to be approximately $255,000. I'm rounding up. And PCTPA and PG&E's liability is established as 50-50, and that's per the State Freeway Master Contract, which was approved back in 2004. So we have to go by that. Our liability amount, therefore, is around $127,000 and some change. Of course, the final amount will be reconciled once we complete the project, because there's always the possibility that it could come in less. There's also the possibility that it could come in more, depending upon conditions discovered. So keep that in mind. So our liability amount is currently will be funded by locally controlled federal funds, as well as Sparta funds. And the Sparta board took action last year to set aside funding for right-of-way, of which the utility acquisition here is part of that. The removal of the gas lines will occur between January and May next year. All of this work will be completed prior to construction, which will commence later in the fall and then really get underway in 2023. All the work will be occurring in Caltrans right of way or City of Roseville right of way or any utility easements that PG&E have. The Roseville and the Caltrans right of way will require encroachment permits, which we will work with PG&E on to acquire. There is an existing easement on a property known as Straub Stevenson. You may recall we were back before the Sparta board, for those of you who are on the Sparta board, in June, where the Sparta board authorized the executive director to move forward with acquisition of that property. Those easements will be abandoned. They are no longer needed. The easements where they are located will become part of the 5th lane. The recommendation here, important part is PG&E has executed the agreement. So the agreement that you have in your package has been vetted by legal counsel and by PG&E, and so everybody's ready to go. We just need your approval. So we're recommending that you approve the utility agreement known officially as number 2452.1, and you approve that, and you authorize the executive director to execute that agreement and to disperse funds as needed as part of this agreement process. I'd be glad to take any questions. There is a representative from Dock and Engineering here in case if we get into any technical questions.
I don't anticipate that, but we'll find out.
Okay.
Questions from the board?
Chair Joyner, I'm actually going to be recusing myself from this item as I'm an employee of PG&E.
All right, very good. Thank you for letting us know. Any other members of the board have questions or comments? If not, I'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item?
We do have one member of the public. Mr. Garabedian, I will unmute you and you'll be free to comment.
Thank you. Mike Garabedian this morning. Welcome, commissioners. Clocking for Placer County tomorrow. When I spoke to you recently about this project, I pointed out that from our point of view, this is a needed safety project, though not needed for any other purpose. So when it was on the last California Transportation Commission agenda, finally, they were explicit in saying that this project was going to reduce the 2 lanes that go off of 80 westbound to the Douglas Boulevard off-ramp and to Douglas Boulevard. This is not a safety improvement by any means to change that area, which I'm sure all of us here have driven many times, to squeeze those into that situation where to turn left onto Douglas and then right to go down Sunrise. You need to be sort of on the right side when you turn left and so forth. That looks like a pretty clear case of the opposite of an increasing safety dangers, safety threats from people from reducing that lane. Now, we recognize that District 3 is kind of obsessed with expanding lane expansion. I don't know if this is one of those cases or not, the auxiliary lane proposal, but to us, the safety problem is rather severe. Ironically, Caltrans now is one of its most aggressive safety culture efforts that it has had. And that focus, we think, should be trained as an example on this project, which at least one transportation engineer has recognized the issues we've raised as being potentially quite legitimate. So we are opposed to anything to do with this project, including this agenda item. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Anyone else from the public wishing to comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of adoption of resolution number 21-29.
Hauserfeld seconds.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie?
Amara,
Yes.
Baker, Broadway,
Yes.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdischelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. We move on to item K, fiscal year 2021-22, final findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund. Mr. Coy.
Thank you, Chair Joyner and board members. So today we are discussing the final fiscal year 21-22 LTF apportionment. Today I'm also being joined by Susie Woodstock from HDL Company. She has presented here on past occasions to talk about the status of our economic recovery in Placer County, as well as kind of an outlook on what this fiscal year may bring. The LTF funds are derived from existing 1/4% of the existing sales tax. And it's a significant source of funding for Placer County agencies to deliver various transportation projects. So I'm going to start off quickly with just 2 slides to kind of recap how we finished off fiscal year 2021, and then I'm going to turn it over to Susie to get into some more of the details. This chart shows how we've proceeded in terms of sales tax revenues from that 1/4% existing base tax, dating back to the last part of fiscal year 18-19. 2021, that's shown in that kind of orange salmon color, started off relatively strong and actually probably surprisingly in terms of, just being briefly out of the initial stay-at-home order that was put in place in March. We continue very strong over the rest of the fiscal year. And to remind you, we did start off fiscal year 2021 assuming a 20% reduction in revenue. So this came as a big change in terms of revenues in March of 2021. We actually increased our LTF apportionment in terms of how much we released. We increased it by $2 million and arrived at a final revenue estimate of $21.9 million for fiscal year 2021. However, we did finish up the year at $29.5 million, which was 18.5% increase over what was projected. And I don't think anyone, even HCL, assumed that we would see that great of a swing in the positive direction. So that did leave us with $7.9 million in carryover, which we will utilize and redistribute back out to jurisdictions this year. So with this, Susie, I'm going to turn it back over to you to go through kind of a review of each of the job economic sectors in Placer County and what some of the thoughts are moving forward into this fiscal year. We'll wrap up then with kind of a discussion on what's in your board packet, which is the final apportionment for this year, showing a recommended growth rate of 1%. There's a little bit of spoiler alert. There are some differences that we'll talk about towards the latter part of this discussion between HDL's recommendation and the recommendation in your staff report. So with that, Susie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. We can well, good morning, Chair Joyner and board members. I'm Susie Woodstock, a principal in the sales tax division at HDL Companies. Along with providing this for the planning agency, we also work with several of the agencies specifically in your county, including the county, Rockland, Loomis, Lincoln, Colfax, and Auburn. Next slide, please. So like Aaron said, that the local transportation fund is the 1/4% tax on all sales in the county. And this is including the place of sales as well as the allocation from the countywide pools. We don't get the data for the 1/4%. We get the 1% Bradley Burns, which is the second item on that list there. But it pretty much tracks that we can divide that Bradley Burns by 4 to get to the 1/4%. They're pretty similar. So next slide, please. And we can't talk about individual businesses, so we talk in terms of major industry groups. And this is slides showing how your pie is split. Autos and transportation are your biggest major industry group at 25%. General consumer goods is your second biggest group. And then the pools are coming in as your third biggest group. Hotels and fuel both coming in at about 10%. We can go to your next slide, please. And I'm going to talk in terms of adjusted data. So the state distributes the cash they have each month as it comes in, but sometimes that includes late payments or it can not include some missing payment. It can include old adjustments, old audit adjustments from many years ago. So it doesn't really look at the sales trends for each quarter. So what we do in our database is we move it back into the quarter where the sale occurred. And so when we're looking at the forecast, we're looking at the actual sales for a quarter instead of when the cash was distributed. And that just helps with forecasting out. You don't want to be forecasting based on adjustments or missing payments. You want to have the actual sales for the quarter. Next slide, please. So looking at second quarter 21 results, that was April, May, June of 2021. And remember, we are comparing to April, May, June of 2020, which was the lowest point of the pandemic effects. So overall, we would have expected to see a large percentage growth, but we would have expected to see that in some of the recovery categories, such as restaurants and hotels or fuel and service stations, which you can definitely see some big bumps there, but that's really because last year's numbers were lower. Of interest here, you can see autos and transportation, just huge growth. And again, 2Q20 was a low quarter for autos and transportation, but really way surpassing what we would have expected, even for general consumer goods. And then the state and county pools. Second quarter, what we were seeing is people were getting out and about again. They weren't home, they weren't locked in place anymore. And so we were expecting maybe a flattening out of some of that online sales, but look at what we saw, still growth in that state and county pools because people were still buying online. Some of their habits have changed. Next slide, please. And so then instead of just looking at second quarter, since it was the completion of the fiscal year, we can compare 1920 to 2021. And again, I'm looking at the adjusted. Aaron just showed something that he was showing the cash trends. So on an adjusted basis, sales were up 15.8%. And you can see autos and transportation, again, one of the drivers of that big growth, the state and county pools, those online sales, another big driver of that growth, and then general consumer goods there, still doing well. Just a note, in the state and county pools, there are more than just general consumer goods. There are online sales in autos, there are business and industry, and building and construction, depending on where the business was located. So when I say online sales, it is kind of a combination of more than just general consumer goods sales that are driving those online numbers there. Next slide, please. And then to compare to the pre-pandemic levels. So this is looking at fiscal year 18-19 comparing to what we just saw in 2021. And here again, autos and transportation way above what the pre-pandemic levels. We were seeing some slowing in autos and transportation before the pandemic. And now you can see we've far surpassed what was happening. Building and construction, business and industry have also surpassed those levels. Fuel and service stations and restaurants and hotels, slightly below. We didn't see the full return just yet. General consumer goods right at the pre-pandemic levels. And look at the pools. The pools have almost doubled from this bar chart. What's happening there is in 18-19, AB 147, that required out-of-state vendors and marketplace facilitators to start reporting. That started implementing in second quarter of 2019. And so besides just the shelter in place that people started turning to the online shopping, we also had some legislation that was requiring a lot of new revenue to flow in. So you're seeing two things in that growth in the pool allocation. It's not all just growth from existing, it is new revenue that was brought in this time period. Next slide. And then let's look at the regional results. So this is by quarter, and you can see second quarter for all of your surrounding counties all saw a similar pattern. Again, restrictions were lifted in second quarter and people were out and about a lot more. The one Sutter County, they're not quite following in 2Q20. They had a new business open up. And so everybody else, though, has kind of a similar pattern of when the pandemic hit and how the recovery is going. And this, in the title there, you can see this does not include the pool. Everybody would have a much different pattern if we had that pool, because the pool was growing while the pandemic was hitting. So but just to note, this is just the brick and mortar stores. Okay, we can move into the forecast now. And I'm going to start by kind of talking through some of the considerations. One is that third quarter will continue to see the demand that we had for domestic travel. We did have the Delta variant slowing things down just a little bit, but really not, not a big shelter in place. And that's actually the other assumption at the very bottom, saying that we will not see restrictions related to Delta or any other variant. So third quarter is still going to have that continued demand like we saw spike here in second quarter. Some spike in spending was due to lack of spending on services and events. We're going to see that in the next slide, but we definitely think that pent-up demand was released in second quarter, but over this whole last year, some of the spending was due to people not spending on services. A return to work transition will continue now projecting through the end of 2021. Originally, we were expecting kind of the whole rollout to be complete by this summer. And with the Delta, a lot of businesses have delayed that full transition to work or what their hybrid situations will look like. And so we're thinking towards the end of this year, people will know a little bit more what these new work situations will look like. April 2020 was the low point. We had that second shelter in place in December and January, and that did not drop us near what the first shelter in place did. But again, we're assuming there will be no restrictions going forward. We're not assuming that there's any extended recession from this. As just the opposite. We were seeing strong growth throughout this whole time. Inflation is included as price increases in each category. So we're hearing a lot about inflation going on, and that has been thought of as, for instance, restaurants and hotels, we're seeing about a 5% increase in menu prices. So that's included in the restaurant and hotel projections. And then modification to some business structures in the pool. So the pools have some movement going on there, and we have included that in these projections. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what I was talking about, that the consumer spending shift. So you can see above the 2020 there, the big dip there in the orange line was services. So in second quarter, when the shelter in place started, services really dipped. Then moving forward, we can see spending on goods, the blue line down below, started to grow. As we're getting the red line here, of course, is second quarter, the data that we're looking at, you can still see we were high on goods spending, but service spending was starting to return. The area between the trend line and the orange line for services is much bigger than the area between the trend line and the blue line for goods. And that's what we're hearing about all the savings that has occurred over the last year during the pandemic, that people have really built up their savings. That savings will help keep spending on both categories, services and goods, going forward. So we don't see an immediate drop in spending on goods. We're going to see a gradual slowing as we gradually return to pre-pandemic levels of services. Okay, next slide, please. So the first big category I'm going to look at, it's your biggest category in the county, new or autos and transportation. So look at the second quarter results, up 45% over second quarter 20. Much higher than we would have expected. And you can see it's being shown as a spike. We're seeing inventory shortages. Again, we're starting to transition to a different type of spending, but really over the next few quarters, we're expecting that inventory shortage to kind of slow the purchases. Prices are at all-time high still. Some of the, over the last year, we saw a lot of trailer and RV type purchases, and we're considering those to be one-time purchases. And so you can see going forward, after we pass through the second period spike, that we're getting back to kind of a normal pattern, but at a higher level than we were pre-pandemic because the prices are higher. Next slide, please. So general consumer goods is your next biggest group. And again, slowly shifting back to more service spending will slow some of this spending. But you can see this group really recovered quickly also. People were buying general consumer goods when they were out traveling this summer. It was right there with restaurants in this V-shaped recovery. And you can see second quarter outpaced its normal pattern. Usually second quarter is kind of a little bit higher than first, but not such a big spike. Expecting third quarter to slow down a little bit, and then going forward, getting back to that normal pattern. Again, slightly higher than it was pre-pandemic because prices have increased. Next slide, please. And then restaurants and hotels. This, of course, has been hit the hardest by the pandemic. This does include some menu prices increasing. Like I said, they've overall gone up about 5% over the last year. You can see second quarter far surpassed your pre-pandemic levels. You also can see here 4Q20, that second little dip because of that second shelter in place. 4Q20 was always a quarter that was a little bit lower than 3Q, but it was a little bit lower because of not only the pattern, but because of the shelter in place there also. So, getting back to a normal pattern, again, a little bit higher than the pre-pandemic pattern. Next slide. And then the pools. Like I said, in second quarter 2019, that AB 147, the first part of it started to be implemented. Fourth quarter 2019 was the marketplace facilitator portion. So that steep rise that you're seeing at the end of 2019, beginning of or through 2020, part of that is that new AB 147. Of course, the pandemic hit in first quarter, and that was, we saw growth in online shopping because people were staying home, and quite frankly, at the beginning, some of the stores were temporarily closed. We do see some errors, in some big errors that are being reported right now, and I have assumed that those errors are going to be corrected in 4Q21 and 1Q22. So that's what that dip is in the coming year. The spike in 4Q20 is a little bit high because we're seeing some errors in reporting right now. So I'm expecting those to be corrected. And then going forward towards the far right of this graph, we get back to what we expect the normal level and the pattern to be after those corrections are implemented. Next slide. So looking at the major industry groups all combined here, the top is autos and transportation, and you can see in 1920, the dip, autos and transportation were really only affected in that second quarter, the beginning of the pandemic. And then you can see the strong rebound that they have come up and spiked, expecting that to flatten off and get kind of back on a trend line there. The second group, the orange line, is general consumer goods. Very much a V-shaped recovery, a little bit longer than what autos and transportation saw, and not as big of a spike in the recovery, but really dipped down in that 1920 and back on trend now. The pink swoosh line, that is the pools, and that's how you can see the AB 147 as well as that accelerated transition to online shopping. Expecting that to slow a little bit, but really the correction is there, is why that is showing as flattening out right there. You can see red and blue, restaurants and fuel both had different low points. For fuel, it really, even though there were less drivers for a period of time, prices stayed low for a longer period of time. So their dip was a different quarter than the dip in restaurants, but all of it getting back on trend. Next slide. Thank you. And then looking at the forecast, again, most of this table is looking at the full 1%. That's the data that I'm using to prepare the forecast. The first column there, or the second column, is the actuals for 2021. And then the forecast for 21-22, looking at that flat. And once again, the number of 21.7 million for your state and county pools in 2021 is high. It includes what we're assuming is some errors in there, and that those will be corrected in 21-22. And then after that, you get back to a normal trend going forward. So the bottom, across the bottom, you see about 29.6 for the actual for 2021, and then 29.6 again, just a very small growth because of that correction that we have showing there. This also has, you can see autos and transportation slowing there, again, assuming that those inventory shortages are going to affect the number of sales there. So some slowing in that group. Business and industry also has some slowing there. Fuel and service stations is seeing the biggest rebound because the prices were low pretty much for most of 2021. So that's the big jump we're seeing there for 21-22. I think Aaron wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, so this is where I mentioned earlier that a little bit of spoiler alert. So if we look at the second column, it says fiscal year 21-22, down at the bottom, it shows 0% growth. And so after going through their analysis, and they're looking very conservatively, there's a good potential to be flat because a lot of the corrections in the various markets that'll occur. Now, this contrasts with the staff report recommendation for a 1% growth. And I think there's a few things that we can take from this, and I'll cover those in the next few slides. I think Susie has one more slide to wrap up, and then I'll kind of cover what some of those differences are, as well as our recommendation. So Susie, I'll go to the next slide for you.
Okay. Well, and then this is just the long-term projection. Again, you can really see these V-shaped recovery, that dip in 1920, and the trend line showing that projection is a little bit higher for the next few years, and then getting back to that kind of trend for the far right of the columns. So that was it.
All right. Thank you, Susie. So jumping back to the difference between 0% and 1% growth rate here, we're really talking about a difference of $344,000 on the bottom line between our two estimates. And the difference really lies in the assumption. So when we wrote this staff report, which was earlier in the month, HDL companies did not have their data that they needed yet to look at that, and we relied on their previous March estimate. And now that they have the final numbers, they see that there's a number of corrections that may occur, as well as they're being very conservative in their estimate, trying not to overshoot it. But knowing that with a $344,000 difference, what it was in our staff report, we're also recommending still is to maintain that 1% growth rate, because I think there's still a number of unknown factors that could occur. There could, as Susie and we talked about previously, some of those corrections could be pushed off till the following fiscal year, 22-23. We could see some additional growth. And there may be some unanticipated variables that could, completely sway our direction and our trajectory. So what we're recommending is to go ahead and maintain that 1%. That is up for discussion with the board. You could choose to go a little bit lower, but by maintaining the 1%, if we come in somewhere close to that, what we're doing is putting more money potentially into the local jurisdictions' revenues for their various budgets, as opposed to having a very large carryover fund balance going into next year, which generally kind of messes with how they budget each year. So if we can kind of keep it relatively consistent, that's better. And generally, we've tried to maintain in terms of, if you look historically, it's been around $1 million, $1.5 million in terms of a fund balance. So if we can maintain that rather than a large swing in every year, it makes it easier for the local agencies to budget. And what we want to do to make sure, if we do maintain this 1% growth, is to be much more involved in terms of updates to you. So you can see how the fiscal year is progressing. So we do monthly status update in our agenda packet each month. So you can see how things are going. And we come back to you in February with a mid-year update. And should the trajectory change, we can kind of pivot at that point in time. So if we were to maintain this 1% growth, this is how the distribution of funds would look. Roughly $37.8 million will be available for distribution within Placer County. This includes both what we refer to as a West Slope, which is South Placer County, as well as the Basin area, which is the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Those revenues are split by population basis provided by the Department of Finance. And then the remaining $36.7 million for the Western Slope would be divided amongst the Auditor's Office for administering these funds and holding on to them. PCTPA receives $475,000 per our overall work program budget. The Western Placer CTSA receives 4.5% off the top, or $1.5 million. This is an increase from in prior years. It's been 4% off the top. This year it's been moved up to 4.5% through discussions with the TOG, the TAC, and a previous board meetings to cover anticipated upcoming shortfalls and revenues. The pedestrian bike account is 2% off the top at roughly 720,000. PCTPA receives 4% off the top, which is 1.36 million for planning. That goes towards all our various planning activities, as well as half of that goes to SACOG for regional air quality conformity, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and other federal required activities. And then the remaining balance of $32.6 million goes to the jurisdictions for distribution. So this is the more familiar table that you're used to seeing and is what is in your agenda packet. This contains a lot more details than the illustrated version I just provided. And I'll wrap up just to kind of provide historical context, and this somewhat aligns with what Susie was showing, but these are actual revenues received over the fiscal years, and you can see the growth that has occurred in the DIP. And I do want to note that, over this same period of time, we're looking at roughly an annual population growth of 2%. So we haven't seen any real big swings, but annually population growth has continued at about 2% annually. So that may be why we're seeing kind of a straight line trajectory here. So with that, I'd like to wrap that up for discussion with the board of whether to go ahead with staff's recommendation to maintain the 1% growth or look at something different, now seeing the report provided by HDL.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Any questions, comments, discussion from the board?
I have a question. This is Dan Wilkins.
Go ahead, Dan.
This is probably more of a point of curiosity, but the amount of LTF funding that gets peeled off the top and ends up with TRPA, how's that dollar amount determined?
So that dollar amount is based on population data. We receive a special population estimate from Department of Finance, and this year the basin's population is roughly 2.83% of the overall total within Placer County.
And then it's that same population base that determines the relative percentages that go to the incorporated jurisdictions in the county as well as the unincorporated county.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item? We have none.
None.
We'll bring it back up to the board. We have lost one of our members. Do we retain a quorum?
We do retain a
All right,
quorum.
so we can take action on this item. I will receive a motion if anyone is so inclined.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval.
Second. I have a motion, Broadway, second Holmes.
Okay. Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. We move on to item L, traffic congestion report presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In our ongoing attempt to illustrate how traffic has returned back to normal and is maintaining kind of a normal trend out there, this is a brief overview of how traffic looks on our major highways in Placer County. And I'm going to start off on kind of a look at the daily numbers here on our various highway segments. So this is a map here showing that the various traffic volumes we are tracking on Highway 65, Interstate 80, and up in the basin area with State Route 89 and State Route 267. We are seeing a slight decrease in traffic volumes as compared to what we saw in the spring. In the spring, we saw a large growth, but right now we're seeing slight decreases on our area highways. State Route 65 is just under 1% decrease from August of 2019, and you can see the corresponding dips of up to 5% on Interstate 80, both east and west of State Route 65. However, in the Tahoe Basin area and the Resort Triangle, we're seeing upwards of 10% reduction in traffic there in comparison to August of 2019. And this could be due to the fires that have occurred in kind of the South Lake area and all the kind of suggestions and recommendations not to go up to the Tahoe area during the fires by the various entities within the Tahoe Basin. But if we look at the detailed traffic over time, we can see here that we're still pretty much at the top in terms of at the peak of traffic. If you look at State Route 65 and I-80 at Rockland Road, we're still kind of at this historical highs there where we did see some decreases at Interstate 80 and Riverside area, which is the Placer-Sacramento County line. Those might be attributed to just still the lack of commuters going into Sacramento and more travel within South Placer itself. There could be a number of other factors that we just haven't been able to pinpoint at this point in time. But we can also see the State Route 89, 267 have generally stayed consistent. They had a small dip there in April and May when the first stay-at-home order was initiated, but stayed pretty constant throughout that point in time. So I'm going to move over just to some hourly trends now. On State Route 65, traffic is still back to normal. We're still seeing traffic volumes that are trending in the peak hours, and we can see those in the charts on the left, which is the southbound direction, and the charts on the right are the northbound direction. But if you look at that hourly distribution of traffic, 2021 is tracking right with 2019 there, with the exception of, and this is in all cases, with the exception of the early morning commute hours. We're seeing, more traffic kind of during that midday peak where there may be some flexibilities in job schedules. And we are also seeing traffic speeds that are generally equal to or right about where they were in 2019. As we see more traffic volumes, we're going to see more congestion, we're going to see more slowing. So that's the general theme kind of moving forward here. On Interstate 80, we don't see the trends really following that of State Route 65 as we did with the daily traffic volumes. Here on the left is the westbound direction, and on the right is the eastbound direction of I-80 at the Placer-Sacramento County line. Here we can see in our hourly volumes, we are below where we were in 2019, and the speeds are consequently a little bit higher, resulting from the less congestion. We kind of see that across both of those charts here. And if we move a little bit east towards Rockland Road, we're going to kind of see some similarities. During the afternoon hours, we're actually seeing more traffic on this portion of I-80 in the westbound direction, which is on your left side of your screen in blue, than we did back in 2019, 2020. And in the eastbound direction shown on the right, we're also seeing more traffic during the midday there as well. So to move up the hill a little bit, just wanted to highlight what's going on with State Route 89 and State Route 267. Although we did see decrease, or in addition to seeing the decreases there, these are volumes that also decreased over where we were last month for the month of July in this area. So we can see kind of there are some peak, which maybe the job flows and various activities there are still kind of maintaining some sort of normalcy as opposed to where they are down in South Placer with a big commute to Sacramento. But we can see during the early mornings, traffic volumes are similar. They dip a little bit throughout the day, but follow pretty closely to what they were in, but they are lower during the afternoons. On State Route 267, again, some similarities. They've been lower throughout the middays there. And on the left is, I believe, the southbound direction heading into the basin, but then more so heading north back out of the basin towards the Truckee area that's shown on the right hand of the screen there. And our final slide, just to wrap up in terms of where we stand with traffic in August of 2021. This is a slide of the top intersections that Roseville actually tracks traffic at. They have their traffic signal counters, and this is something they report to their boards. We thought we'd share it here as well. But these top 10 locations are all within 10%, roughly 11% of where they were prior to the pandemic. So I think across the board, we're seeing a lot of returns to prior conditions, a lot of different trip patterns than we've typically seen. But I think that may change as our colleges, Sierra College, Sac State, come back online, and we start to see more commute to Sacramento that is anticipated to occur sometime, in the first of the year in 2022. So with that, I'll wrap that up, and if there's any questions you may have, I'd be glad to answer.
All right, questions from the board? I see no hands raised. All right, this is an information item only. Very thorough as always, much appreciated. I like the addition of the Tahoe area information as well. It's useful. Oh, Bruce does have his hand up. Mr. Holdeshek. Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Joyner. I just want to provide, I regularly commute I-80 west, east and west, or baseline Riego. And I just want to provide some real world perspective. It's really, traffic is really back. And the congestion that I see building around Madison and Greenback is increasing with each day. So, what you see in the presentation is reflected in my commute. That's all I wanted to add.
Well, Bruce, we really appreciate it. We'll move on to update on potential 2022 transportation sales tax measure. Mr. Lupin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The item before you today is a request by staff to receive a status update on where we are at with our potential 2022 district sales tax analysis as opposed to countywide. Excuse us for that typo. And then to provide us direction on the South County district effort. We are, as you'll see in our slide presentation, we are recommending, due to impacts of the variant, that we move into a maintenance mode scenario for a very short period of time. So if we could put up the slides, if we could go to the next slide. So our efforts for the sales tax measure are essentially to get us ready for state and federal funding. Our expenditure plan, which we have brought to the board many times and also to the community, focuses on the local area or the district, if you will, providing matching funds for state and federal funding. In relatively no case do we fund a project entirely by ourselves, which would require, if we were to do that, it would require significantly more local revenue, and is just not in the cards to do. And so we have some things that I've listed here in the slide, which we are currently getting ready for. One is the first one is not panning out like we want, but there was a state surplus, and from time to time there will be a surplus at the state level, and the state has put a few dollars towards transportation infrastructure in their surplus. They were hoping to put a lot more, but because of disagreements within the state and within the legislature, they were able to put a few more dollars towards that. But we need to be ready when these opportunities come forward to be able to capitalize upon them. As you all know, from many news reports, the federal government is working on and has approved a transportation infrastructure plan of about $1.5 trillion, of which 500 million is for transportation. The rest of it is for other things. And then they are currently considering a $3.5 trillion measure to fund a number of things, which still has a long ways to go. SB1, we continue to ready ourselves for whenever there is a every 2-year opportunity to apply for funding. We actually capitalized very well upon the last round of that, and we're getting ready for the next round for that. And again, these matching funds from a potential sales tax measure are critical. And then, even when we get in terms of developing our projects, we have planning grants that are available. Here's one of them from the state, and there are others through FTA and other entities. And again, we need to be ready so that we can get our projects ready. So this is all about getting projects ready for funding and to match this. A lot of folks think that, well, you know, when these things come forward, they are, we no longer need sales tax dollars here locally, and that is absolutely incorrect. We may qualify for programs with small amount of match, but qualifying gets us nothing. We have to be competitive for these, and to be competitive for these programs, in many cases, we have to come up with 50% of the cost of the project to be competitive, because there are fewer dollars to go around and more people applying for dollars. So if we go to the next slide, our public outreach program. So we began in earnest after the board authorized us to move forward on a potential 2022 measure. We moved forward very quickly into educating the public on two items. One is the need and the fact that, as we just learned in our, or not just learned, but just emphasized in our last presentation, the fact that traffic is back. And so our message has been very carefully crafted around polling and around that message that traffic has returned in force in South Placer at 105% or greater levels. And so we've done many things in terms of billboards, in terms of upgrading our website, in terms of earned media, in terms of events, to really get the word out within the district that there is a need and that there is a crisis on the horizon if we don't address traffic congestion. Go to the next slide. And so we've done a lot of stuff. We've not only the items that we've mentioned, but we've done a lot of events, and those events have included a lot in the last few weeks, of course, like Splash, the hot chili event that many of you attended in Rockland. That was a very large audience and participant level with that community, and we got a lot of exposure in that. We have things like the kiosk that continues to get a lot of foot traffic at the mall, or billboards. And we have the Taste of Lincoln Showcase event coming up here on Saturday. We also have been doing a lot of events. Our focus has changed a little bit from the business public to more of a general public focus. And so we've been participating in a lot of events with the Park and Recreation departments, mainly of the city of Rockland and the city of Roseville, to go out to their movies in the park, or to their Park Pulse events, which is a music event in Rockland, and other events. And again, many of you have participated in those. So if we could go to the next slide. So as we have faced in the very near past, we have a challenge again with our sales tax measure, and that is the COVID-19 Delta variant. And essentially, we are solving a problem, and that problem is traffic congestion. And so if we have a pause in traffic congestion, we don't have a problem to solve, and therefore it is very difficult to convince people that there is something to solve, or that there are other issues that may be more pressing, such as the Delta variant. So with the Delta variant, what we have faced of late is the fact that our major employers in the Sacramento region are delaying what was a September return to work to approximately a February 2022 return to work. The private sector is kind of leading that effort in terms of delaying that return to work, and the state is following. The state really is the key with the largest employment sector in the region in downtown Sacramento. And some outlying state facilities. So the state is going to follow the federal, the private sector with that. There's no doubt in our mind that is happening, albeit the state is very disorganized in its approach to whether the return to work is going to happen this month or next month or in February or whatever. They kind of have an approach which is not centralized, which is frustrating, if you will. And so we're trying to time this. And so one of the things that we're working very carefully with SACOG and our other sister agency, El Dorado Transportation Commission, the Sacramento Metro Chamber, Valley Vision, a number of other private sector groups, Los Rios Community College District, to try to embark upon a regional survey so that we know when that's going to come back. Right now, it's a lot of anecdotal information that we gather. Certainly it's important, but it would be good to know for many reasons when employers are coming back. And so we're working very hard to put together a regular way to gauge employers in the region of when they're going to return to work. SACOG is also working with the local delegation to hopefully have the state be a little more forward thinking in terms of when they're going to return to work, as opposed to a lack of organization on that return to work. On the good news side, we do have the universities returning in session in late August and September. That is a positive in terms of generating traffic and again, characterizing this issue and problem. We don't see any reason why they wouldn't continue unless there's a new development with the Delta variant. But so far so good. And William Jessup and Sierra College and Sac State and UC Davis are returning two in-session classes, not 100%, but a good chunk to in-person, and it is generating traffic. As we indicated in the last presentation, traffic is back a lot in Placer, but not so much throughout the region, as Director Howdeschelt characterized. There is increasing traffic near the split, but Placer's traffic is somewhat unique in terms of its level of activity. So we hit 64% in our last polling for the proposed district. It was not the top issue. It was although when we read the measure, the 75 words that would be in a proposed measure, we hit 64%, which is one of the highest levels we've hit of late in the district. But we kind of term that as a soft 64 because in terms of priority issues, we went from a number 1 to number 3 issue down to a number 7 or number 8 issue. So we need to work more on that and to have we need to be essentially at 2/3. But we need to also be at a solid 2/3 before staff recommends to you that we move forward with a measure. So we're going to recommend what we're recommending is a temporary pause. And what does that mean? If we go to the next slide, we term this as a maintenance mode. And our methodology, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, and then after I'm done, Cherry Spriggs with FSB is going to elaborate a little bit more on, but our method is essentially we poll, we do outreach, and then we poll again. And that's worked very well for us. And it allows us to adjust our message. It allows us to see where we're at and decide whether or not we should move forward. We were going to have a poll in early October. That was our schedule. And we feel very strongly that we should move that poll because of the Delta variant to November 30th. That would happen right after the Black Friday shopping event and is a time when a lot of surveys are done. So it is not an unusual time to do surveys on various topics. And certainly we think that it is prudent to do that at this time because of what is going on. If we do that, and I would say it's still an if the Delta variant gets worse or we're experiencing something else, we may come back to you and say, well, no, November is still too early. But at least at this point, that's what our thinking is November would be an opportune time to do that. And assuming that, we would then report those findings to the board in January. That's because we usually have a early December board meeting. as opposed to a regular fourth Wednesday meeting. So we would report that to the board in January. However, we would utilize the subcommittee of the board to meet earlier and report those findings to that subcommittee. So we would know earlier than that, and the subcommittee would know earlier than that. We would then start prepping for a potential February outreach restart, that we would then actually do that full restart in terms of outreach in February and March. And then if we were to put this, consider putting this on the ballot for 2022, we would then poll again in April, report those findings to you on a go or no go recommendation. We would then have to go out, as we do with our South County District approach. We have to go out and actually ask all of the jurisdictions in the county if they support or don't support our expenditure plan. We do that in May, and then finally in June, the board would make a decision of whether or not to go or no go for 2022 or for 2024. Then a private campaign would begin if the board decides to put it on the ballot. If the board decides not to put it on the ballot, then we would begin a longer term maintenance effort to gear up for 2024. So I think we have one last slide. So what are those activities? So that maintenance mode is a reduction in effort. And a lot of these are the same things that we've been doing, but we would continue to focus on things like the kiosk, earned media activities, things like op-eds and other things that don't cost very much money other than staff time, minimal digital and traditional advertising. Our traffic cameras, which we're going to show you at the end of this, that are now up and running, we would continue to promote those to local television stations. We have also launched a thing called Rocket TV, which is a video monitor in 40 businesses in Roseville, Rockland, and Lincoln that is playing a message focusing on our efforts that is now underway, and we would continue to do that. We would certainly keep our stakeholder group updated, and we would continue our billboards through the current contract, which will end on October 31st. And so that's what we would term our maintenance mode, and that's what we're recommending today. So I think with that, I will turn it over briefly to Cherry to come up and talk and a little bit more about our methodology.
Awesome. Good morning, Chair Joyner and directors. Thanks for having me here today. It always ends up being a highlight, actually, when I get to be here before you and talk about this program. So our commitment to this agency has always been to demonstrate to the community that you all are good stewards of taxpayer funds. And what we're asking you today by delaying the poll is aligning with that message and what we're trying to do. While our numbers district-wide in June were very good, as Mike said, we deemed them as soft because of the fact that we fell in terms of prioritization, and our world is still in flux, right? So even with those strong numbers in June, the other issues that did take precedence for the residents in our community were drought, recall, waste and mismanagement in state government, homelessness, and of course, COVID, right? Those all came before traffic and where we're at. And rightfully so, right? Those are all very major, scary issues to folks out there. Originally, we planned for the October poll, but as we heard from the previous sales tax presentation, which that was a great segue into this piece, that we were all expecting our world to be back in the summertime, right? We were all expecting we were going to be open and ready to go when people are returned to work. And now, as we're looking at that, we don't think that we will be returning to work until Q4 of this year, Q1 of 2022. So When I did speak with FM3, your polling consultant on this to get their thoughts, they did too think that we should move this poll. They felt that because of where we are, the results of an October poll would not be that different from what we all did in June. So one of the things that I think is important for you all to know is that if we get to November 30th, let's say, and we still find ourselves in this world, we can push the poll again if need be without any cost to the agency, without incurring any cost to the agency. And that's always been very, very important to me. That said, we have outlined a program that Mike just showed to you that continues to educate, but still reserves funding for a more aggressive outreach program in Q1, Q2 of 2022. Though I look at that and I think that's still pretty aggressive, but we're not spending a lot of hard costs. We're not gonna have a lot of hard costs is what I should say. And then just one last note pertaining to the education itself. I thought you all may find this interesting because I certainly do. The list gets longer in what we have to educate people around, right? We always have known that the need is the number one, right? We got to educate folks around the need. That's what you're allowed to do, right, as an agency. We continue to have to educate around the gas tax and what that difference is and what those funds are we can use for. We continue to have to educate around development and how it is approved and proposed here in Placer County. What is a little bit different that's coming out of all of the outreach that we had done earlier this year is we have to educate now around the new and unique traffic patterns that we're seeing that Aaron touched on, and the state surplus. And the thing that really does keep me up at night is this federal infrastructure plan, what that means for us, what it means to our conservative residents that we have here, and how we start to talk about that and differentiate that. And as Mike said, it still has a long way to go, but we're thinking about that now, right? So this program that we have, really addresses these difficult policy issues that we have to boil down and explain to folks. And they are complicated. And it's, for a family that's living their life, doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're not living and breathing this every day, we really need to do, to continue to do that. But we also have to make sure that we're, striking that balance and reserving their funds for when we need them. That is, I'll take any questions.
All right, very good.
Okay.
Before we, excuse me, Mr. Chair, before we open up to questions, we have one more slide to show you. And that is our traffic cameras. So if we could switch to Jeremy, these are some things that we've worked really hard to implement. It'll take Jeremy just a second here, and we've finally got those to go live. And these are things that we are hopeful that our local television stations are going to be using in their morning newscasts every single day, or as much as we can get them to do that. So we've now got them up and running, one on State Highway 65 and one on Interstate 80. And you can see that is a live shot. And why that's important, why we don't use the Caltrans traffic cameras that are out there, is these have to be broadcast quality. These have to be as if the television station were to put one of their trucks out there that broadcast this live. And otherwise they wouldn't use it. And so for a relatively small cost and a great contribution from the Moyer Investment Company with a couple of their buildings they let us use their rooftops essentially on 65 and on 80. We were able to install these cameras, and they are now up and running. So.
And by we, it was quite literally you on the rooftop installing.
Yes, Mike was up on a rooftop during when we had some very severe smoke, and actually I would say Rick as well. We had some engineering challenges, which it's great to have an engineer on your staff to help us get through those in terms of roof load and wind load and all that fun stuff. And so it was a team effort. But yeah, we do what we need to do, and again the team of staff, the team of the company True Look that we purchased these cameras from, and then again we can't emphasize enough the opportunity that Moyer Investment Company provided us for at no cost, utilizing their rooftops for this effort is key with this, and key to keeping the costs down significantly. We can move these cameras around. We're kind of leaving them in place at the best angle for the proposed, to demonstrate how much traffic it is out there. We're, at 10:46 in the morning, you can see traffic is pretty good. But if you look at this, probably in about an hour around lunchtime, you'll see a pretty good backup on, especially on Highway 65. So with that, that's our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions on this. And again, our recommendation to you is to move into this maintenance mode for the next couple months.
So Mike, when this is thrown up on the news feed, is it just the video portion of this?
Yes.
Is there any identifier of PCTPA or? class of
We're
movies?
working on that. If you at the very Jeremy, if you could pan up maybe just a smidge on that, the other way, sorry. You can see down in the bottom left corner there.
Oh, okay.
We're working on making that a little, probably converting that to white so that people can see it. So we're still working out a few little bugs on this as well.
Okay. No, that looks good. That's really useful. Thank you. And I noticed that you pretty much tossed the whole camera thing over to Bruce's or Rick's area of responsibility. If anything goes wrong, it's the engineering side of the house.
Well, yeah, it's really their fault. It's really his fault if the thing blows off the roof or something, but no, it's we, literally you have to plan on, hurricane force winds which we never have here, but that's what you have to calculate. Yeah, really. But if we get to that point, Rick and I will jump up on the roof and take the thing down. It won't, we wouldn't miss the camera for that anyway. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an action item. I don't know that we need to take a vote on it. You just need direction.
Just direction that concurrence to move into maintenance mode, yes.
So I got a thumbs up from Bruce. Anyone not in favor of going into maintenance mode at this point?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a question, if I may. We talked about gathering information relative to the return to work for businesses. Are we also active in talking with municipalities, the school districts relative to changes in TOT that I know some of the municipalities have been talking about, as well as bonds and any other tax measures that may be pursued that could also create a change in people's perspectives?
Yes, as I've indicated in earlier presentations, I'm on the city managers group, city county managers group, which is the four city managers and the county CAO, and we work very, very closely together on timing of these things in terms of exactly what you said, and making sure that this times well so we don't have multiple revenue items on a ballot. And that's why, moving to 2024 is surely it may be what we have to do because of the traffic, but it is fraught with issues like you're talking about, Director Broadway. That if we were to do that, then there's a big negotiation between the jurisdictions with school districts who all are looking at 2024 for revenue measures. So it is a very complicated endeavor to start moving things around. Right now, it's looking, if we were to go in 2022, we're fairly confident that we can do that. But we continue those discussions with the jurisdictions. I think specifically with TOT, they would like us to make a decision as soon as possible so that they could get those TOT measures in a good spot for them to put those on the ballot.
So June's probably not as soon as possible in their perspective, but
We're talking about that. Yeah, we're talking about that. That's to put it on a, if it's possible to put it on a June ballot. That may be too soon for them to put it on a ballot. So we'll see. Again, it's a bit of a negotiation and dance we have to do to make sure that in this county that we don't have multiple revenue measures that compete against each other on a ballot.
Right. They could all suffer as a result.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the approach. We need to do the groundwork. We need to do all the public outreach as we move forward. So everything's ready to go when the opportunity arises. So I think this is a proper approach to a potential sales tax measure.
Director Amara.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, I also appreciate the thoughtfulness and the approach and the outreach. And I know this is a little premature, but if it does extend to 2022 or 23 or 24, the input that I've been receiving, and as our population changes in the county with a lot more young people moving up from the Bay Area, they're crying out for mass transit and other opportunities to get cars off the roads. Would we be able to have a look at that, or do you have any more plans for getting people off the roads? And I know there is some monies already allocated for bike and pedestrian and some for public transit, but I was wondering if we extended, if that will be looked at again too, as an overall, insight into, what's coming down in the future.
Sure. So we did do the outreach event in the community. We had 14 to 15 outreach virtual meetings out in the community in April and May, including the city of Auburn and the Auburn area. And one of the things we tested was that exact question: is do you want to put more money towards one thing or another? And actually, in your that was sent out to you yesterday and on your dais is the results from that. And in April and May, they actually supported the level of mass transit and alternative modes in our existing expenditure plans. So actually they asked us to keep it the same. And but if we move to 2024, I think we would probably do that kind of outreach again, because you're Director Amara, you're correct that we need to continually take the pulse of the community to see if we should put more money into different modes. I would say one of the things that we are doing is as opposed to saying, well, we have a dedicated fund for that, we've actually in our messaging talked about specific things. So like microtransit and the third track project, as opposed to these amorphous pots of money for future things. And I think people have appreciated that. So they kind of have an idea exactly what we're talking about when we say we're putting money aside for this. They can connect better to a specific project.
Thank you. And I fully support that approach. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other board member comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public. Any member of the public wishing to comment?
Lee Bastian, Sheridan Mack. I just wanted to let you know, my son works at Franchise Tax Board, and they've been told to come back to work on November. So I just thought he thinks they might push it back, but right now they've told their employees to come back in November. So I just wanted to give you that update.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
I would say we're also trying to quantify in this survey, what does return to work mean? Does return to work mean 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week? So we're trying to get a handle on, well, what exactly does that mean? There is actually a poll coming out by Valley Vision probably in the next couple months, kind of a preliminary one. It deals more with workforce, but it did ask a few questions on return to work. And I think what you're going to see is in that poll is which actually surveyed 42 employers right here in Placer County. You're going to see a move to a hybrid approach. We thought there were going to be more companies converting to a full remote workforce, but there wasn't. So it's a focus on this hybrid approach, but we need to dig in more into, well, what does that hybrid mean? How many days a week? If you look at existing pre-pandemic traffic on Interstate 80 and Highway 65, you did see greater traffic on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and less traffic on Monday and Friday because the state workforce was in a 980 situation with their existing work pattern. So we may see something like that, where certain days of the week are heavier than others, which would be not dissimilar to what we saw earlier. So.
I didn't see any additional members of the public, or do we have?
We do have 2 members of the public who'd like to speak. I will unmute Michael Garabedian. Michael?
Hi, Mike Garabedian, Placer County Tomorrow. The picture becomes clearer here about how this commission is beginning to not just inhibit our moving forward to solve our transportation problems, but it's like regarding the 2024, these ahead elections and getting measures on the ballot, we're beginning to infringe on across the board, the county. The county, why is the county not a self-help county? It's because for years now, basically the same budget that was not approved by the voters in 2016, that was defeated. You're hanging on the same projects, basically to promote development, projects that cannot possibly relieve the middle to long-term congestion that's coming. The 1.5 million spent on polling, I guess that's recent. It's interesting that it's more than was spent to try to pass Measure M. That was about $1 million. So we're putting more and more public money into this effort. The direction that I think the commission should take, that we would recommend it go back to the drawing boards on the whole thing and have real public input, an informed public input, instead of constantly misinforming or misleading the public that adding these lanes, that building Placer Parkway is going to relieve congestion. It's not going to relieve congestion. So, how should we move ahead and getting the public really involved? Some of the cities and counties don't know how to do that. They claim they do it. And this, what we've seen now, reflects the continuing effort to try to persuade the public about what your priorities are and have been for such a long time. So kind of the same old. How will we get out of this rut? Maybe not, at least postponing one of the surveys is a baby step to that, to this obsession with trying to get the people to do something that they don't want. So the focus really needs to shift, and frankly, this commission is increasingly becoming a problem removed from solving the real needs, real transportation needs, the real future needs of the growth that we've approved and over and we're committed to. Time for a new vision. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garabedian.
All right, we got Peter Eklund. Peter?
Just got a couple of quick comments. I would hope that move ahead as fast as possible with the vote. I think it can pass with adequate outreach. And I think it needs to pass just because, as Mike pointed out, we need the money to compete for projects. And the best time to do planning for projects is during a time when the problems are emerging, but they're not there already. So when they're there, your projects can be built. And so, I think it can pass. With adequate outreach. The main thing about transportation doesn't make any difference what the projects are. It's choices. It's choices between modes and choices between routes, and that's important to know. And I think the reason that Placer is experiencing is because we have two major freeways going right through the middle, of the western area. And the freeways are used for local traffic. And this is not understood very well. It's used for local traffic. So it's used for both local and regional. And we need to look at both systems, the local and the regional, make sure there aren't any bottlenecks on either one, or we can maybe shift traffic more towards local, whatever. The other thing to do that's important to know in looking at the existing trends, one of the things that people forget is that the commuter traffic, the commuter bus traffic is way down because people weren't comfortable riding buses during transit. And that's a significant, and not just in Roseville and Placer County and also other cities. Those numbers are way down, and that's contribute. And so there's a lot more driving alone traffic. And just a small increment can really affect the congestion, 5% or can just push it into congestion. So we need to push getting the commuter buses back to the previous level and focus on improving the commuter bus system. This has been recognized and nothing has happened. And particularly, and the other thing just about, there's lots of little things that can be, right now, Placer County Transit has no projects pending, no projects at all. The same system has been in existence since 2005. And so we need a plan. If we're going to ask for money for something, we need a plan. And now is a time that the plan could be developed. You don't need the money to come up with a new vision or a vision that makes sense, and not have everything, thrown in a bucket after every unmet needs study. So there's things that can be done in the background, more so than just outreach. There's things that can be done in the background to try to get more support for a sales tax measure. One final thing, lots of non-riders, and this is shown in almost every sales tax measure. Non-riders vote for transit because there's citywide benefits at a whole level of benefits, and it's not. I have not seen this recognized at all by any of the outreach. You can reach the non-riders and they'll vote for transit if for no other reason say, oh, I want the other people to ride. But a lot of people want it as a backup. If something else goes wrong with their vehicle, or they can get by with one vehicle rather than two vehicles.
Mr. Eklund, if I could ask you to
Things
wrap
to
up.
throw in the hopper. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Mike, did you want to address any of that? But bus rapid transit from Lincoln, that type of thing?
So we do have a number of projects that we're working with our transit operators group on. One of those is an RFP that's going to be out very shortly in terms of microtransit in the communities of Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville. So that is something that we're currently working very hard on, and we have been working for the last year on. And then following that, it's likely that Roseville Transit and to some extent Placer County Transit will look at some version of a comprehensive operational analysis to really take a look at their entire systems to determine whether or not there needs to be made some adjustments to underperforming routes. So, and those things are actually in the short range transit plan for those transit operators. And I should mention Auburn Transit is because they're much smaller, they're more nimble and they can move faster. And so they're actually implementing a microtransit and electrification and a number of other things very quickly. But those are all items that were in the short range transit plan that this board approved a number of years ago. You know, it takes time to get those things going, and our operators are very small. They have very small staffs, and aided with our staff. You know, we do things as fast as we can, and certainly the pandemic threw a huge monkey wrench into transit. So we're working on those things, and maybe one tangential reason why we're working so hard on those things is because of the sales tax measure, because there are dollars set aside for transit in the sales tax measure, as I mentioned earlier. And so we want to have those things ready for when a measure would be on a proposed ballot and revenue starts hopefully flowing from that measure. So we are working on that. Again, maybe not as fast as we would like, but we're making slow progress.
Got it. Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, would you like an actual motion on this, Mike, and a head count?
No, I think we have direction.
All right. Very good. And we will move forward to your executive director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I have maybe a slight bit longer executive director's report because we haven't met in a couple of meetings. But the first two items I'd like to talk about are personnel related. The first item is I'd like to introduce to the board our new fiscal administrative officer, Jody Lacoste. Jody is in our audience behind me here. We worked very hard with the retirement of our Shirley LeBlanc, our existing FAO, who is retiring and whose last day in the office is next week. We worked very hard with recruiting Jody. Jody comes to us from the Grass Valley School District, where she was the chief business official. And prior to that at the Union Hill School District as the business manager. And those were organizations that are very, from a fiscal standpoint, very much like our organization, and the position was very much like our position, where it's kind of a one-person shop that does all the fiscal things from the very beginning to the very end with an audit. And so we were looking for an individual that had that wide scope of experience, and Jody is filling that very well. And a big thank you again to Shirley, who allowed us to have an overlap between between when she was leaving and Jody getting here and when she was leaving, because that allowed training. We normally don't have training from the person leaving with the person that's arriving, and that's especially on the fiscal side, very, very critical. And so that's something that we've been implementing over the past few weeks. And as Jody would probably attest to, it's a bit like drinking from a fire hose, but it is a great benefit to have Shirley here. And we thank her for her many years of service. She is not here or on the Zoom, but we plan to have a little staff level event for her next week, and then we will send her certainly a thank you letter on behalf of the board and on behalf of myself. I don't know if you wanted to have Jody come up and say hello.
I would love that, actually.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be serving this agency as the fiscal administrative officer. I'm very happy to be here. Everyone has been extremely helpful during this transition, and as Mike mentioned, Shirley has been instrumental in this transition, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, welcome, Jody.
Thank
I was not going to throw you under the bus, but Mike did, so. Yep.
The next item is also personnel related. Our associate planner, Kathleen, has moved on, has decided to take a position with Caltrans after her years of service with us. She was hired at relatively the same time I was, I think maybe a week later or something along those lines. And she has been a wonderful asset to our agency. And she has been involved in some extremely key projects to our agency. Probably the biggest one is, as we talked about earlier, we were able to garner about $170 million from the various SB1 programs. Kathleen was the person that wrote those. Kathleen and David were the people that wrote those grant applications. And Kathleen led a effort with other staff to work with the 14 jurisdictions in Northeast Sacramento County and Placer County to decide which projects to apply for and which were ripe for applying for. And we were very, very successful and got those funds. And Kathleen was pivotal in those negotiations and then in that grant writing and then successfully getting those funds. She worked on many projects for our agency. To mention a few here, she did our unmet transit needs. She worked with our transit agencies every year to greatly improve our unmet transit needs program. It's a very difficult program to work with, but she did that. She also reconfigured our CTSA program in terms of our Health Express. We had a service that was not sustainable, and it was the dollars were rising on how much the Health Express cost us. We simply could not afford it. And Kathleen again led that effort to convert that to a volunteer driver program, much like our other service, which is now called Placer Rides. And she, I could say, pretty much single-handedly converted those systems and to something that we can afford, and has already been very successful. And then the last project, and we could go on forever, but the last big project I wanted to mention was our efforts with the pandemic. We, like many employers, were faced with a crisis of maintaining productivity and getting our work plan done. But we had to do it differently. And Kathleen, because she's always been our IT administrator, that was one of her tasks as in her first employment agreement or employment assumptions for her coming on board with us. And she, again, with help of Solvi and Aaron and some others, were able to make remote workforce happen in our agency, and we maintained our productivity. And as we move forward, it's something we will utilize to keep our productivity up, to retain our employees and the like. So those are three very critical things. And we can't thank Kathleen enough for her 3+ years of service with the agency. And we wanted to give the board an opportunity to say a few words about Kathleen as well. So.
All right, certainly. Any comments from the board? I see Kathleen's smiling face up there. The one in orange.
Yes, I'll take a second to first thank Mike for his kind words, but also to thank the board. I feel very fortunate to have started my career in Placer County. It's rare for a collaborative agency with a board representing really distinct jurisdictions like ours to really be able to look above their local interests and do what's best for the county. And time again, you all have done that over the last 3 years. And it truly, truly has been a pleasure to work for you. And I'm certainly going to miss working for the PCTPA team. You all know this, but this is a tremendous staff who work very tirelessly for the benefit of the agency, and I'll miss that drive a lot. I'm with Caltrans now at Caltrans headquarters, so I'll certainly be advocating for my home county and our statewide interests and keeping an eye on our rural and suburban issues. But as we all know, I won't have quite as dedicated of a team on all fronts up here at the state. So thank you all.
So Kathleen, you couldn't see it, but I'm fairly confident I counted at least 2 people near tears during your comments. You are going to be sorely missed. While I knew how integral and important your work was to this agency and to the board, I don't know that I had a full comprehension of all of your contributions. So you are going to be sorely missed. But we wish you nothing but the best in your new position. And hopefully, if we need somebody on the inside at Caltrans, we can give you a call and see if we can work your magic down there on our behalf as well. Any other members of the board wishing to comment? Mr. Holmes?
Yes, Kathleen, thank you for your service. It was really great getting to know you. You hit the ground running, and the amount of work you did for the 3 years you were here was really, really well. Positioned us in a really good position. And I miss you already. It was always, since I'm just across the street, I always come over and like to check in and see who's working. We're always there. So anyhow, congratulations. I wish you well in your new venture, and check in every once in a while. Take care.
There you go. Your visits may be why she invented the whole remote work environment for PCTPA. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, just real quick, Mr. Chair. Kathleen, just want to thank you so much for all you've done for PCTPA. It's been a pleasure working with you. It's certainly sad to see you moving on, but happy for you having the opportunity that's been presented. You were always so responsive, whether it was questions that I personally had or it was residents who had questions and were seeking more insight, certainly something I couldn't answer. So you were always there to fully answer those questions and address their needs and help point them in the right direction. So we are going to truly miss you, but again, knowing that you're there advocating for us at Caltrans is certainly a good place for us to have you. And again, wishing you the best in your new role. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Kathleen. We're going to go ahead and move on. Mike?
Okay. I did forget one really important role that she fulfilled, and that is that she
just came back.
Oh, she was. I guess it's hard to describe what this was, but maybe I would say she was our chief morale officer.
Oh, absolutely.
And so she, we're kind of sometimes a bunch of fuddy-duddies and the work on transportation stuff all the time. But Kathleen really got us to do things like dressing up for Halloween and having fun events and lunches and that type of thing. So
which you're going to keep up now, right?
We are gonna keep up.
No more fuddy-duddy.
Yes. So that and I'm I may sound that's just a icing on the cake thing, but actually it's a really important thing to keep morale up and to keep us a small staff working very, very hard to have those little bit of fun events once in a while. So
yeah, I can say as a board member, she always made us feel welcome and always had a smile on her face.
Yep.
All right.
Moving on. And we will also send Kathleen a letter of thank you on behalf of the board and myself. So moving on, some other items that we're working on just to make you aware of. We are going to be submitting a planning grant application like the ones I mentioned in our in our previous item for a potential or not a potential for a feasibility study of expanding rail from Sacramento to the Reno area. And so this is something we embarked upon back in 2000, I would say 2004 to 2009. And we were actually asked by the state of California to apply for this, to look at this. And so this is a partnership of SACOG, PCTPA, Nevada County Transportation Commission, and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and a lot of other agencies to look at this. It kind of grew out of a Tahoe Mobility Forum that was had over the last couple of years. This was one of their recommendations. So we're going to take a look at and see if this is feasible, and we're working with our partner Union Pacific Railroad to see if this has any legs to it. So we're going to be applying for a California Sustainable Communities Planning Grant to fund this activity. We would be the lead agency for this, and would study the feasibility of this. It would potentially very large, but very important project to the Tahoe Basin and to Reno and to the Sacramento region.
So is this adding an additional trip?
We don't know that yet. So so one of the things we have to look at is rail capacity. So this study will look at rail capacity. So can we fit, how many extra passenger trains could you fit on there given the freight railroad system that's in place over the Sierras? And then it would be a preliminary demand analysis to see how many people would ride this. The thing that's changed from the 2004 to 2009 time period is Reno has established itself as a very viable home of high-tech companies. You have Tesla, blockchain, Yahoo, a number of very high-tech companies that are in the Reno area that want rail service up there. And so we will take a look at this, as well as the importance of rail service to Tahoe as a visitor amenities or visitor mode of travel.
So I think one of the things to keep in mind, I've taken that trip to Reno from Roseville and then back again in both directions. It was a lengthy trip. It was 5+ hours. And on the return trip, sidetracked for at least half an hour out in the middle of nowhere. So I think competitiveness with that drive up 80.
Yeah, the California Zephyr, which is the name of the existing service, which goes in each direction once a day, is not a very viable service. So we would have to do things fundamentally different for this to be successful. I would say that this is because this is such a long-term project and a very expensive project. There are some interim things that could happen, which are benefit, which is if we establish a demand and document a demand, we may actually see things like, for example, Megabus expanding their service because they see a demand here leading up to eventually rail. So it may not be just, nothing today to rail tomorrow. It may be, a nothing today to bus and then to rail. Okay. The other thing I mentioned already, we're about to embark upon an RFP for microtransit for the south part of the county, and Placer County Transit is leading the way on that. It's going through their procurement division right now, but we'll be hitting the streets hopefully here in the next few weeks, looking at the communities of Rockland, Lincoln, and Roseville. So very, very important project. And lastly, on the transit side, we are working, and Director Joyner, you're very well attuned to this. SACOG completed their next gen transit study, which is a study which looked at many things, but maybe just a few inches deep at the most. And so we're working with SACOG to maybe come up with a implementation plan for that, which takes a little harder look at things. One of which we feel is very important, which we're recommending as from staff to staff, is a examination of restoring confidence in the commuter bus system. It's something that's very, very pivotal to the whole transit system because it pays for a lion's share of the other service. And so we're going to be working very closely with SACOG in the coming weeks on an implementation plan, for lack of a better term, on the next gen hopefully before it goes back to the board at the SACOG board. We have been thrown a bit of a curveball by the Federal Highways Administration, the local office here for California. They're examining the way that with SACOG allocates our RSTBG and CMAQ funding to both Placer County and El Dorado County. So the three entities again are working very closely with FHWA to hopefully keep the system the same, because local control to El Dorado County and Placer County of those dollars is very, very important. And so we may need to tweak our systems a little bit, but our hope is that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater with that thing, because it would mean it would be very, very bad thing for us to have to participate in, say, for example, the SACOG funding program for our projects here in Placer County, and likewise in El Dorado County. So unfortunately, we'll be spending a bit of time with that whole effort in the coming months to improve the system as opposed to changing it wholesale. But very, very serious implications to our jurisdictions, and we're certainly keeping the TAC and the public works directors and the city managers very closely involved in what's happening with this, because it has serious implications to our jurisdictions.
Extremely serious for those of you who haven't seen the 4-county process that we fortunately are not a part of down at SACOG. It's extremely competitive, very heated, and I think most folks come out of that a little less than pleased with the results. I would hate to see us have to expand that to a 6-county process and fight for those dollars.
We have this fight about every 4 years, so this is not the first time we've fought in that, and we've actually been talking to our former executive director a little bit about those former discussions. I won't call them fights, but discussions, to make sure that we preserve our existing system.
If there's anything those of us who serve on SACOG can do, please let us know.
Absolutely. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is our board meetings. And as you know, we've been meeting in a hybrid format since the beginning of the pandemic. And the state of California has passed Assembly Bill 361, which was signed by the governor, and then an executive order kind of emphasizing, if you will, AB 361 was signed by Governor Newsom a few days ago. So what that will do is that will allow us to continue a hybrid format during a time of stated and declared statewide emergency, which the governor plans to continue. So during those times of emergency, we are able to go in a hybrid format. However, there is one thing that we need to do, and our legal counsel is going to maybe expand a little bit upon this after I talk, but that is we have to make a finding at the beginning of our next meeting before we do have any other agenda items. We have to make a finding that hybrid format is necessary to us doing business. And so Deanne and I are going to be working with Solvi on preparing that resolution, if you will, They'll be ready for the next meeting. There may be developments that happen between now and that next meeting, and we'll certainly keep you informed, but that is our plan to enable us to continue to be able to have board members meet in this hybrid situation without going back to the old system, whereas if you met remotely, you'd have to do a public notice of where you were meeting, and you'd have to let the public, we'd have to have essentially a public meeting place where you were meeting, which is very cumbersome. So Deanne, would you like to say any additional words about that?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I think at the end, you clarified the additional item I was going to add. The COVID rules relaxed some of those Brown Act requirements that allowed or required if you were meeting at a teleconference location, that location had to be open to the public and it had to be on the agenda. So we haven't been doing that additional step in the last year and a half to make those remote locations of our dining room and our bedrooms and our homes open to the public and posting that location on the agenda. If we want to continue that practice, the statute is less than clear. However, the understanding is that at the beginning of each meeting and every 30 days thereafter, the board must make an independent finding that meeting in person would present an imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees. So if it's the desire of the board to continue the teleconference meetings in the manner we've been doing the last year and a half, the board needs to make that finding every 30 days. It's kind of unclear if you can make that finding and then continue with your substantive items on the agenda. It becomes a little vague if you come to a meeting to make your renewed finding or make your initial finding, and there isn't a majority of the board that supports making the finding that there's an imminent need. And my recommendation would then be that you'd have to stop the meeting and would not be able to address the substantive issues on the agenda. So there is some, vagueness and some issues, but if it is the desire to continue with the current format to allow board members to participate from their homes without posting their homes as a public meeting location, then this 30-day finding must be made at the next meeting and 30 days thereafter. So some policy decisions and some implementation administrative decisions to move forward with our current format.
So Deanne, if we were, let's assume we had a board meeting canceled, we were 2 months to the next meeting, would that gap present a problem?
So it's unclear. So the statute's written well for board of supervisors and city councils that meet weekly. It's not written well for other agencies that meet monthly or even thereafter. The statute says every 30 days you must renew your finding. The suggestion by many attorneys and local public agencies is that at each meeting, you'll just start the meeting with that finding. There's some that are arguing you have to have a special meeting to determine if you can have a substantive meeting remotely. It's uncertain, what the outcome is because the statute is unclear. But like I did say, many are moving forward with the processing it that at each meeting, you'll continue that finding.
All right, thank you. So I suppose that inspires a discussion among us about how we wish to move forward.
Yes, so this is part of the executive director's report, and I think the executive director would welcome some input and some from the board members on the potential options. And I see 3: meet back in person, continue the COVID rules, which would require the 30-day resolution by the board that there's an imminent threat, or meet pursuant to the old Brown Act rules that would require us to post the teleconference locations and have the board members have those locations open to the public. So there's kind of 3 paths for continuing meetings.
All right, thoughts from the board?
I'd like to hear.
Or staff can figure it out.
Yeah. So
Sandy Amara.
go ahead, Sandy.
How difficult is it to declare an emergency? Because it really is, we're at a critical stage in regard to the virus. So does it, I think you said it takes some time, or does there have to be a findings and a vote, or how does that work? Sorry.
Yeah, so there's two prongs. One, there must be a state ordered emergency from the governor, which we still have. And there must be, there is a potential to have a local order to promote social distancing. In Placer County, we do not have that. So the other option is for the legislative body to make a finding that there's an imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees if you met in person. And this board can do that. It just needs to be, you need to make that finding, and staff could provide the information to support the current state of the health risk.
So
thank you.
Deanne, if the board were to choose to meet in person, would we be able to continue the hybrid for the public without this special finding and the 30-day re-up?
That's correct. We can continue the broadcasting meetings. In addition, one option is a board member could always listen and could always provide comments remotely, but their vote would not count if they were not noticed at a traditional Brown Act meeting. But we can continue the remote participation by the public, by others, by consultants, by staff people. It's just the board must be physically present in the meeting, or we needed to have posted their physical location open to the public in order for them to vote.
So the board members who have been attending remotely, how do you feel about posting your location and keeping your doors open?
It's not a big deal. I think it's probably more administrative. I'm guessing it may be more administrative effort for the staff that, I mean, I participate from an office building that's ADA accessible. That's a public building. Although the building itself is closed to the public right now, so that could prove a challenge.
It could.
Yeah.
We'd love to see you down here anyway.
Yeah, I want to get down there too. Just so darn convenient with saving the 4 hours of travel time.
The other nuance to that is if we did go down that path and we noticed it, you can't move. You can't, say, well, today I'm meeting at my house, but I changed my mind. Now I'm meeting at Starbucks. No, you're stuck there where that notice was.
Got it. So how would you like to proceed, Mike? Would you like to have each of us reach out to you and share their thoughts? Do you want to continue this conversation? We're running pretty late here. I don't want to drag this out.
Well, I mean, we're Deanne and I are very willing to set it up where you make that finding that it's a danger to the health and welfare to have to not allow a hybrid meeting. I think that would probably be the easiest method. I do know that there's some different lines of thought about the fact that you did that, and so if you're comfortable with us doing that, I think that would be the easiest to implement, and would require the least amount of staff time and the most flexibility.
So is the concern about doing that we would make that finding and then jump right into the meeting?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, can we have one special meeting to make that finding in advance?
Well, yeah, that's what.
And then we could be a month ahead.
Again, this thing was passed just a few days ago, and so there's differences of opinion between different attorneys, if you will. But it seems like most of them think that we can do this. Now that may change in the coming weeks, and you're right. I guess that would be option 2, is to have a special meeting where you are actually present to be able to do that.
You'd only have to have.
And on that, you can take the special meeting vote electronically. So the statute's very clear on that point, that to make the determination, you can be remote. It's not so clear on if you can also handle substantive issues at that meeting, but it is clear you can do that vote remote.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we could have a quick
Yeah.
special meeting just for that purpose. So.
And we'd only have to do it the one time and then we can stay. up
Do we have to do it every 30 days?
Every 30 days, but
It could be a continuing on your agenda, right? As one approach. It's again unclear because it says every 30 days you must make the finding. Sometimes we don't meet every 30 days.
so here's what I'm thinking. Had we had a special meeting a week ago to make that first finding, we could then today make that finding for 30 days from now so that we would be covered for our next meeting and we could just keep doing that.
Yeah, we could.
That would be a very complying with the vague provisions of the statute, a very comprehensive way to proceed. Because
would the board be willing to have that one-off special meeting to make that finding?
Yes.
Anyone not comfortable with that?
We could literally meet at 8:45 and have that special meeting, and then at 9 o'clock we have our regular meeting. We could do it the same day.
Okay.
Right, Deanne?
yeah, the problem with a 9 o'clock meeting would be how it's noticed. If for some reason it's not successful, the noticing, those remote would not be able to participate. Right. If it's successful.
So it sounds like if there's maybe if there's board members who would potentially vote no on that, if they could let Mike know between now and our next meeting, so that he has doesn't get us into a pickle inadvertently.
Yeah, if there's some concerns, not how you'd vote, but if there's concerns about moving forward, to let us know so staff can evaluate that and move forward the best course of action.
Mike's squirming in his chair. He doesn't want to be polling the board for a vote.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, just if you have concerns, I think Deanne characterized it well.
So it makes sense to me sometime in advance of the meeting, rather than 15 minutes before, have a quick special meeting on Zoom. None of us have to show up and take that vote, and then keep it rolling.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Great. Thank you for your thoughtful comments.
You're welcome.
I think you might have a public comment on this.
Do we? Okay. Mr. Garabedian's hand has been up the entire time since his last opportunity to speak, but I'm willing to open it up. Mike, did you have a comment on this? I don't think so.
Okay.
There we go. I would just had the opportunity to unmute. Thank you. Yes, I did want to speak specifically to two items here on the transit planning, and particularly the rail planning. A good idea about going over the Sierras and so forth. I think it's important to keep on tap the manner in which the state rail plan should handle rail passenger traffic north of Sacramento. It looks like Marysville, Yuba City has now been put into that plan, where it wasn't the last time, and I don't know if that's a final that it's in there, but that brings up again the fact that there was, I think it was a Butte County Association of Government study, a preliminary study back in 1995 of passenger rail through Roseville, Lincoln, and Yuba, and so forth. So we would hope that that would be something that could be advocated in rail planning and be kept on the burner. And on the also, just to mention on the transit proposal, at one time, as I'm sure many here know, Roseville was in Sacramento Regional Transit. And that is something that we also think should be kept on the burner, going back in for feasibility and consideration at the right time. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Anyone else? Seeing none? Was that it for your executive director's report, Mike?
Yes, that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you. Any board direction to staff? I see none. With that, you have many informational items in your packet. Read those at your convenience. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 27th. So that's interesting. So had we made the finding today, we would be outside the 30 days to our next meeting. This could be more complicated than we think.
It is. It is.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. I'm counting on it. So with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you all. Thanks for your patience. It was a long one.